Welcome to TTS 2021, organized by section, the idiomas from Facultad de Humanidades, USAC, the embassy from United States and Guatemala, and AHERE. My name is Jacqueline España, and I am glad to host this conference today. I would like to begin by giving some general instructions for the conference. First, at the end of the conference, there will be 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please don't forget to write your questions in the chat on YouTube. We will happy to read them at the end. We invite you to subscribe to our official channels, Idioms, USAC, and TTS Conference to follow all the conferences on these 3 days. 10 minutes before the conference ends, we will be sharing the attendance link in the chat. It will be available 15 minutes more after conference ends. Please make sure to sign it to have access to your diploma. Diplomas will be available on June 12, 2021 for 30 days in the link that will be shared along with the attendance link by the end of the conference. We appreciate your valuable participation in the conference. A linguistic approach on pronunciation features of the English language, given by Mr. Jorge Gustavo Lopez, to whom we gladly welcome today in the name of the organization committee of TTS 2021. I will be introducing Professor Jorge Lopez by reading his biography. Professor Gustavo Lopez has a degree of Universidad de San Carlos, Facultad de Humanidades, licenciado en Letras por la Universidad de San Carlos, Facultad de Humanidades, estudios de posgrado en la maestría en Educación Superior FAUSAC, también estudios en Lingüística del idioma inglés, estudios de Psicología USAC en Escuelas Psicológicas, PEM en inglés en FAUSAC, conferencista en temas sobre lingüística, filosofía, teoría y crítica literaria, técnicas de enseñanza del idioma inglés y diseños curriculares. Participación en congresos pedagógicos, filosóficos y lingüísticos. Experiencia docente. El profesor Jorge López ha sido profesor titular en la Facultad de Humanidades, Departamento de Letras de Sección de Idiomas, profesor titular de los cursos de fonología, fonética, morfología de inglés, profesor de crítica literaria, teoría literaria, gramática del inglés, diseños curriculares, métodos de investigación, técnicas de traducción, coordinador y profesor de inglés en colegios privados. Let's welcome Professor Jorge Lopez for this interesting conference. Your time, Professor.
Well, thank you for attending this conference. Well, I'm glad to be with you through this way. Well, my conference is going to be divided in 3 parts. First of all, we are going to see some features about the pronunciation of the English consonants. But before that, I'm going to give you an overview of the linguistic fields. And then also we are going to check some issues about the stress as well as the unstressed phonological features of the English language. So, well, as you can see, linguistics is a scientific field, which, of course, the focus is on the language. So linguistics is the scientific study of language. So first of all, we know that a language, well, the principal definition and the most common definition of a language is a way of communication. But of course, each language is unique and is structured differently, and also shape our lives, shapes our identities. Through the language, we communicate also our culture, as well as our thoughts, and well, generally, it is the meaning of communication. So, but basically, the language is structured in some basic, points of description. So there are basic units of description through linguistics. So for example, here, The conference, well, I will give you an overview of generally about the study of linguistics. So first of all, we start with the lower level, which is the phonological level. And here we have other branches that are auxiliary of phonology. Well, phonology is the systematization of the sounds of any language. You know, it is the classification, you know, according to the description of the sounds. And well, phonology is, you know, it focuses on the pronunciation, but it has two other branches like phonetics and phonemics. So phonemics is basically the physical description of the pronunciation of a language, and phonemics tries to describe visually, you know, how the sounds could be assimilated, you know, through our articulation, you know, through the articulation of the speaker. So also, let me tell you that linguistics is a good tool for us, you know, as English teachers, because of course, you know, nowadays also you can research more if you are interested in this field. You know, I love a lot for phonetics and phonology, also linguistics, but of course, sometimes it's you know, for some people could be a hard field, but of course it depends on the way we approach it. But I think that in our case as English teachers, so we need to know a little bit about linguistics. So here, you know, on this conference, we are going to focus on the pronunciation of consonants and as well as the stress, you know, and also on the unstressed syllables. Basically, and you can see, you are going to see a general overview, how can we describe the language. But of course, as I told you, so each field of linguistics, as for example, in the case of phonology, it has the basic unit, which is the phonemes. So the phonemes are, you know, the unique, you know, the specific units of sounds. So we have two kinds of phonemes, like consonants and vowels. But each phoneme has different variations according to the context of the pronunciation of each phoneme, you know, that is called allophones. So for example, it depends on the context, but for example, up sound, so it could be differently in different positions, all right? Well, in the case of, also in the case of pronunciation, we have other features like, for example, supraaccidental phonemes or prosodic aspects, which is about intonation and stress. So on this conference, you know, to limit this conference, we are going to focus on the pronunciation of consonants. It's just, guys, it's just to tell you a little bit about how linguistics is applied, you know, to describe in this case, the English language. And we are going to focus basically on the pronunciation of consonants and the supraaccidental, prosodic aspects, stress and unstressed, okay? So we are going to see some overview about the word stress and the sentence stress. But generally, you know, then after the phonological level, so we go to morphology, which is the inner structure of words, you know, how we combine the different morphemes, you know, to make up words. And then also we have the syntax, which is the basic unit of syntax is the syntagm. You know, it is the relationship of words. And the case of morphology is the morpheme. And then also we have the semantics, which is the basic unit is the meaning, you know, how the words are related into context and they offer a meaning according to the structure of a language. And finally, we have pragmatics, which is the way how we communicate our ideas or thoughts. You know, in this case, it depends also on the cultural matters, you know. As I told you, so the language is, you know, language, you know, any language shapes our identity. So for example, let's suppose that we are in another country and maybe somewhere we hear that someone says, I wanna, for example, a chucho, you know, so in this case, we can relate, well, here in Guatemala, in our culture, we say chucho for hot dogs, you know, so that is a way, you know, like it deals with pragmatics. So it is how we communicate our ideas in a cultural matter. Well, let's start first of all, with the case of the classification of English sounds, so basically they are classified by two units, which are kind of phonemes, which are specific sounds. We have the vowels and we have the consonants. Okay, so basically all the languages are classified by these units, by vowels or consonants. Of course, they are going to differ according to each structure of language. So we are going to see some features, for example, basically some differences between, for example, the case of the structure of Spanish in some way, but of course we are going to focus on English, right? So, first of all, well, we can describe a vowel as it is a speech sound that is produced without any obstruction of the air stream in the speech tract. So, for example, when you pronounce an A or E or O, so there is not obstruction of the air, so that is basically a difference between a vowel and a consonant. So what about a consonant? So, well, there are basically also we can focus on the inventory of the sound. So basically in the American English, so we have 16 vowels, okay? But that is another topic that we are not covered today. So on the case of consonant, so in this case, we have a complete or partial closure of the constriction of the speech organs. So when we articulate, so even they are classified by the way they are articulated. For example, we have, for example, nasals, which refers to the nasalization sounds, or we have, for example, fricatives when there is a friction, when we articulate the sounds. Of course, we are going to see some examples of each. So in the case of the British English, there are 20 consonant sounds. We are going to see in which ones they differ from the American English, while the American English has 25 consonants. Basically, they differ in one just sound, but of course, also and the, for example, and the intonation and the, for example, the other features such as, for example, the case of the constriction or the how the sounds are produced according, because here we are talking about dialects. So it depends also on the region, how they are, the English is articulated. So remember that we have, for example, different accents, like, for example, the British accent or the Australian accent, or the American accent. Also, well, there are some differences in the articulation, but at that, let me tell you that there is a fallacy, when we say that one language is better than the other one, or one language is better pronounced than the other one. No, it depends on the region, So as I told you, so a language is a shape of our identity. So even, for example, in the case of Spanish, so we have different variations, different accents. But of course, guys, we can identify, and that is the deal with phonetics, phonology, to identify a foreign accent. So also, remember that there are foreign accents, we could identify. That's the deal of, in our case of teaching English, to improve our pronunciation and to diagnose, when there is a sound which is not articulated correctly according to the standard. So there is a standard language, well, for example, in our case, well, most of the time, like maybe 90% of our population speaks the American accent, so we are going to see we are going to point out some different sounds, from the British one. Okay, but basically, this is the features. So let's start with, the features of consonants. So this is the way that, of course, well, I think that we usually, as English teachers, we neglect to teach pronunciation because maybe we lack a little bit about linguistic training. or because we focus more on the teaching of grammar. Remember that grammar involves all the fields of a language, like, for example, the pronunciation, the articulation, the syntax, the morphology, so all of it, it is the grammar. But of course, in a class, we can focus specifically on each feature of the language. So we have features of the language as well as we have skills. So far, you know that we usually focus on the 4 skills, like listening, speaking, writing, and reading. These are skills, but of course, the features of the language are, for example, the prosodic aspects or the vowels or the consonants or the stress, the intonation, the rhythm. These are features of a language, and all of these involve the grammar of the language, which is the structure, according to Chomsky, which is a linguist. So, the grammar of a language is the theory of the mind. So it is how we shape our thoughts, through the articulation of the sound. So remember that we have the language as well as we have the speech. So usually this part of this description, this linguistic description is focused on the speech. So how the language is articulated, while the language is, like the institution, it is the social, it is the general way of communication, so that's why we say the English language or the Spanish language, but the speech is individual. And of course, we can identify different accents, as I told you, and of course the rhythm, but in the end, so we can describe the standard language, the one that, so when we say standard, it's because there are deviations from the standard, so for example, when we speak a slang, for example, but of course, we as English teacher, we should teach the standard in English. That is, for example, the academic way, from the academic way, for example, in the case of journalism. So you can see that in English, in the American English, so we can say that the standard accent is, for example, the one that is spoken in the northern part of the United States, as well as the, for example, in the case of TV hosts or news, so we can see clearly how the American accent is articulated. But of course, there are some different dialects, so for example, we can have the southern or the northern accent, so different accents, okay? Well, regarding the features to describe the consonants, first of all, we have the voicing or force of articulation. We have the manner of articulation. We are going to see some specific examples of each feature, and we have the place of articulation. So we can describe this pronunciation of the English consonant by these 3 features or 3 ways, so well, what about the force of articulation? So it refers, whether the vocal cords vibrate or don't vibrate when we articulate a sound, in this case, the consonant. So we say that, for example, fortis refers to the voiceless consonant sound. So in the case of consonants, so they are described by voiceless if our vocal cords don't vibrate. So there are 3 ways that you can identify the voicing. You can place here your finger, or you can, cover up your ears, or even you can place here your hand, to identify the vibration or non-vibration. So Lenny's or weak is when we articulate voice consonant sounds. So we are going to see, a chart, a phonemic chart to see these features. But first of all, let's do this simple exercise. So, well, we need to follow, also when you are teaching, for example, in this case, this sound, so you can also follow these simple steps because, we need to become aware of these differences, of these features when we teach pronunciation, okay? Because remember that unless we are with, blonde hair or blue eyes, so our students believe, but of course, because sometimes they don't believe how the sounds are articulated, because of course, the Spanish transference from Spanish to English. So that's the case that sometimes remember that English in this case could be a kind of difficult for the students to pronounce when they are beginners, all right? Well, the first step is that we use the technique, that is called minimal pairs. We contrast two sounds, but in this case, well, you need to place your hands over your ears, all right, just to, well, you can easily do it. Well, in the case of the pronunciation of sounds, so it is about awareness. So you need to, it is like neurological, also physical, practice, okay? So you need to become aware, well, pay attention, in this case, pay attention to the first and the last sound, or you can contrast the two sounds to identify these differences. For example, voice, you are going to hear the humming vocal sound, in your ears when you articulate the sound, when the sound is voiced, voiceless, after those, you are pronounced without any hum. So, there is not, if you pay attention to this physical production, so you are going to find out the difference. So, well, here we have this simple exercise. So, for example, if we articulate these two sounds, for example, if you pronounce leave, so if you cover your ears, and you articulate and you say leave, so you are going to feel a humming sound in these two sounds, the consonant sound L and the consonant sound V. By contrast here, the contrast is at the last sound, because here we say leave. So there is not vocal cord vibration. So you can place here your fingers or cover your ears, you place your hands in your ears, and you are not going to listen to this humming sound. Okay, for example, in the case of this one, so you pronounce vine, vine, and the other one, fine. So you are contrast the first two sounds. So remember that when we say minimal pairs, it's because we contrast with just one sound. So, and the second case, so the contrast is between and because, the is articulated the same, which is voiced. Okay, for example, in this case, we have these two words, zeal, and seal, So you say, so notice that the place of articulation is the same. What they differ, in which they differ is on the vibration of the vocal cords. So here, of course, when you are teaching this sound, you need to exaggerate, you need to practice with your students and make them articulated as much as accurate as you can. Teach them, well, show them, it is a physical production, which is the deal of phonetics. So you say here, zeal, so you say zeal. So there are some ways, like we say, well, it's similar to a mosquito, the sound, or when you say, for example, when you press, like some like a spray, so zzz, while the other one, you say, so it is silent. So here we say voiced or silent, Also, we have these other two words. So we say the, dime, and time, Of course, we can identify the two sounds, the sound and the t sound. Also, well, we have this one. For example, when we say bark and burn, burn, bark. So here and so notice that usually the consonants become in pairs, so they could contrast. And there is here another feature, because of course we have here the visually word, but of course imagine that a person who whose English is not their language, so it sounds differently. So, you know, we even if we don't articulate correctly the difference, so we might be misunderstood, sorry, because here just with the sound k or n, okay, so they differ in these features. Well, let's continue. So, you know, this is a phonemic chart. This is a very useful chart to see the consonants of the English language as a whole. So, you know, nowadays you can find phonemic charts. So we say phonemic. Then later we are going to see a video regarding this feature about the phonemic field, which is the visualization of the sounds through symbols. So these are phonemic symbols, you know. Also, we are going to see some differences between the international phonetic alphabet, you know, and the phonemic symbol. This is easier, you know, and usually you can find in textbooks, you know, in grammar, in English grammar textbooks, these symbols, you know. But of course, in the case of the international phonetic alphabet, so this chart of the phonetic alphabet shows you the allophones of all the languages, you know, which is a little bit more advanced, you know, but of course, if you got interested in this field, so you can research a little bit more. But of course, we are going to see some features, you know, but here, you know, guys, the horizontal line. So here we have the manner of articulation. So, you know, it is how the sound is, how. So here the keyword is how the sound, each sound is articulated. And the other case on the vertical line. So this is a very useful chart. So I will explain it a little bit, how it works. So we have the place of articulation is where the articulators come together to produce, to articulate the sound. So for example, when we say bilabial, so when we say plosive, so it is the way, you know, it is how. So here, you know, of course, a little bit like explosion, you know, a pop of air when we articulate these sounds. For example, in the case of the voice ones, you know, for example, when we say contrasted with ba, ba, ba. Okay, so here, you know, we refer to bilabial. So we can say plosive, bilabial. In this case, so here we can identify the three features. For example, here we say, first of all, the manner of articulation, which is plosive. Also, there are other names like, for example, stop or occlusives. And the place of articulation bilabial, but also notice that the orange ones, the orange shaded ones, so they are the voiceless. So, you know, here is, so here remember that don't occur the vibration of the vocal cords, but they contrast with a voice one. All right, so here we can describe the three features, you know. So we say plosive, we can say voiceless, plosive, bilabial. So that is the phonetic description of the sound. So here, for example, we have the alveolar. So the plosive alveolar. So this is voiceless and voiced. So here we say, so notice that, of course, pop of air and the, so let me tell you that in the case of Spanish, this sound in Spanish is not articulated with a pop of air before a stressed vowel. And here it contrasts with da, da. But in between, so this is an allophone in the American English, as for example, when we pronounce these two sounds in intervocalic position after in a stressed syllable. For example, we say later, later, you know, daughter, daddy. So notice that this is the sound that differs from the British one, because in the case of the British accent, so in this case, well, remember that in the case of the British accent, so for example, we say daughter, daughter. because it's not articulated the R sound contrasted with the American English. So we say daughter. So we articulate a plosive, you know, or a stop a consonant sound. But in the American English, so that is a big difference. So it is articulated this allophone, which is also called. So notice that I am using some technical vocabulary to describe from the linguistics perspective how it is described each sound. So in this case, it is called the flapping allophone. So that is the term. And then we have the velar, you know, the k and g. So k and g. So notice that they become impairs. So here we can identify also the numbers. So here we can say that we have 7, you know, 7 plosive sounds, okay? So then we have the 2 affricate sounds. So when we say ch or ja, notice that it is the place of articulation is named palato-alveolar. All right, so then we are going to see later more descriptive these features. So I want to tell you first of all a whole overview of the sounds. Then we have the fricative ones. So we have, notice that also you can, well, first of all, I will check on this, you know. So we have the sound and so here the first and the voicing. Notice that they are classified by the same manner of articulation as well as the place of articulation. Then we have the dental, like for example, the sound and the, you know, okay, so they differ on the voicing. Then we have the alveolar, like for example, the s and z. Remember that the orange ones are silent, you know, are voiceless. Then we have the palato-alveolar, like for example, sh and z. Okay. Later we are going to see some examples of each. For example, the glottal, so the okay, and also we have the nasal ones, you know, like for example, the or or Notice that they are voiced. Here they don't have a, you know, a counterpart of, you know, voiceless. So they are voiced. And we have just one lateral, the one that is alveolar. And also here the approximants, also they are called semi-vowels or glides. So we say wa, but notice that in the case of the sound wa is because first of all it's bilabial. So we need to teach this sound to our students by this way. We say round your lips, okay? And then say would, because, you know, if you don't train your students to articulate the sound, so that's why that they usually say, for example, when we say wood, as for example, the material, you know, a table is made of wood. So they say wood, you know, they say wood. So they round, but they pronounce first here in velar, but it's the other way around. So first you round your lips, but of course the position is here, then go back, you feel it that goes backward to the velar. So when we say wood, so notice the articulation. And also we have the R sound and the ya sound, okay? Well, we are going to continue. Now we are going to see some examples, so, and some more precise definitions. So notice that there are 6 ways of manner of articulation. Okay, so let's see a little bit more about it. So the manner of articulation refers to the interaction between the various articulators and the airstream. For example, with plosive sounds, the articulators act in such a way that the air is temporarily trapped and then suddenly released. So that is basically the phonological description. So there are, you know, 6 manners of articulation. So we have plosives, affricate, fricatives, nasals, laterals, and approximants. Well, here we have the articulators, you know, the place of articulators. Notice that you know, the mouth track. So of course they are going to describe also the how you know, where the sounds are articulated. For example, remember that we have labiodentals, bilabials, alveolar, palato-alveolar. Well, let me tell you that also this chart could work in this way. So I'm going to go back. So for example, even you can check all the sounds that are in the vertical position. So here, for example, when we say bilabial, so here what they are going to differ in the case of the manner articulation, because the place is the same position. For example, when we say bilabial, so this is plosive because of course there is a kind of explosion when we articulate the sounds. We say p or b, but notice in the case of the nasal, so yummy, you know, so it is also bilabial, but the way, you know, the manner of articulation is nasal, you know, also, and this position. So imagine that here we have these alveolar sounds, or d, or ra, or s. Notice that the tip of the tongue touches a little bit the alveolar ridge here, you know. So when you say s, or z, or n, or l, okay, so on the case of this one, so notice that also remember that on the vertical position, they differ on the place of, and you know, on the manner of articulation. So here we say ch or ja, but here we say j. So here, of course, remember that, well, in a case of an affricate, it's a combination of a fricative and an plosive sound. So here, that's why there is this representation, because imagine that is the case when we articulate the t sound and the sh sound. So here we say ch, or ja. So notice that also occurs a little bit of explosion in this case, you know. Well, we are going to see a little bit in more detail these features. Okay, so now in the case of the plosives, so we can describe that there are 6 plosives in the consonant, in the English consonant. But of course, remember that in the American accent, so in the case of the t or d, become an allophone in intervocalic position. So that is also a description, because this allophone is an allophone of the t and the sound in intervocalic position in a stressed syllable. Okay, so well, for example, here we have these sounds again. You know, we have p, or b, or t, or d, or k, or g. Okay, so we say hair, bear, time, dime, caught, got. So notice that they differ on each and one sound, you know. So basically, that's why that we need to teach to train our students, because of course they differ. In this case, in Spanish, they differ in the case of the you know, the pop offer, you know, the aspiration. So that is also another feature that in this case we say aspiration. So the voiceless consonant sounds, in this case, they are aspirated in stress position. So we say pair, the consonant bear, time. So we say t, t. So, you know, also there are funny things, you know, like for example, we can place a sheet of paper in front of our mouth. Or if you have, well, I don't have long hair, but for example, for the girls, you know, so they can place their hair and say, and then their hair is going to move, you know. Well, that is a technique, you know, to teach these specific sounds. So in the case of the t and d, phonemes have one allophone in the American English accent, as I told you. So it is the sound, so it is represented. So there is another convention, guys, in the linguistic description of these sounds. Notice that the phonemes are placed in slashes. So these symbols, so when you see in, you know, in textbooks, in phonological textbooks, so that is also a convention. So the phoneme is placed in slashes, and the allophone is placed in square brackets, you know. So in this case, it is a variation of these two sounds, the sound t and d in the American accent, you know. So as for example, we say daughter or daddy, a cold voice alveolar tap or flapping allophone. Okay, so remember that that is a distinction, a basic distinction between British and the American accent. Okay. Well, we have here the Affricates. So there are two sounds, two Affricate sounds, they occur when a complete closure is made somewhere in the mouth, and then the soft palate is raised when we say ch or ja. Air is pressure increases behind the closure and then is released more slowly than in plosive. So you can contrast, for example, that and a ch. So, here is about, well, let me tell you that when we can see, or when we can like identify the international phonetic alphabet. So there is that you are going to have a description of all the allophones of the languages around the world. So we are going to watch a video at the end. But imagine that, for example, in the case of African, the African language, so imagine that has some like, for example, weird sound, like, for example. So imagine that someone says hello to you like, hello. So, these are some differences, in the case of sounds, but basically, the linguistic features of a language is basically on the articulation of sounds, how the sounds are articulated. Well, here we have some example, like, for example, charge and ja. So, and ja. So we say charge and judge. Okay, so the fricative ones, so in the production of fricative, articulators move from, towards each other to make stricture or obstruction in a flow verb, but air cannot be stopped completely and escapes through narrow passage with friction or a hissing sound. So, it is similar to a snake when you say, So that is a principal feature of the fricatives. So we have 9 fricatives, like, or, or z, so we say seal and zeal. Okay, we say and so notice that here, like, so it is for example, when we say they, they, okay, so that is the difference. Remember, that is in the case of voicing. So they are described as, the same manner, place of articulation, but of course they are going to differ on the voicing. So one is voice and the other one is voiceless. Okay, so we say here, for example, rush and rouge, or hot. Okay. Well, we have the nasal. So there are 3 nasal sounds in English. These sounds are pronounced or uttered by escaping the air partially or completely through nasal cavity. For example, they are like, for example, the sound, like moon or sun. Or we have the remember that is alveolar, but it's nasal, noon and sun. Okay, and here we have this one. Usually occurs, for example, on the combination of and ja, or and g. So we say sing, so sing, like reading or bank, and you say sang, okay? Like the lateral, there is only one sound in English, which while added in this sound, the air escapes through, along the both sides of the tongue. When you say, so, place the tip of the tongue in the alveolar ridge, but of course the air, it goes on both sides. So we say like, silly. Well, to become more descriptive, so we say that in, in the, for example, initial position, so we say that is the clear, and the last position, we say the dark, So, for example, when you pronounce, like, for example, feel, well, it's different when you say like, lake. Notice the difference. Feel, okay, and lake, all right? You know, the approximants or semi-vowels. So there are 3 semi-vowels or semi-consonants. Semi-consonants. Why? Because, you know, phonetically, they sound like vowels, and phonologically, like consonants, you know. So phonetically means their mechanism of producing the sound is the same as vowels, because there is not any obstruction of the R. When you say yeah, yeah, when you say, for example, so is that it does not, the R is not obstructed. Okay, you know, so the phonology, they give sound like consonants. Why? You know, because of course there is one way to test that they sound like consonants, you know, because remember that we have the articles a or an. So you say a wall, you know, wall. You don't say an wall, okay, but you say an apple, right? So another one, for example, red, red, red. But notice that the articulators are not blocking the R string. Okay, and we say yeah, you. This is sometimes a difficult mispronounced sound because of the transfer of Spanish. So remember that in Spanish there are 3 allophones. For example, in the case of the word yo, yo soy, yo. So we can say yo without touching, you know, the blocking of, not blocking the earth through the airstream, or you can say yo. So here it is like the sound ja. So these are, let me tell you that it is not, we don't say, it is a fallacy to say, well, that is not correct to pronounce that way, because, you know, it depends on the region and the dialect. And also we have the Argentine articulation when you say yo, you know. But of course, in English, so it is different. That's why that when we say you are, you know, usually we say you are. But when we say you, so we are talking about the Jewish people, you know, when we say yet or jet. So the, you know, the airplane, you know, like, for example, jet. But we say yet, you know, I don't understand yet, okay? All right, so we need to train our students to teach this specific sound. You know, the places of articulation. So here we have also, again, you know, so the bilabial, when the lips against each other, so we say or b, or wa. Okay, so here we have, you know, this chart. So remember that also is good to know. So here it is about 2 things, you know, like become aware of the sound, but also visually, and 2, you know, like teach our student the sound. So you can practice, you know, each sound, you know, you can do drills or games, you know, to practice, you know, and sometimes well, of course, usually it depends on our way of teaching, but of course, sometimes the students might, you know, like enjoy, you know, because there are some funny things, you know, when they start, like, so imagine like practicing and they laugh at each other, you know, well, you know, it's you can do funny things. I know that you are creative teachers. Places of articulation, for example, the labiodental, you know, placing the upper tip toward the lower tip, like, or, okay, so they are, remember that here we are focusing on the place of articulation. You know, here we have the dental, the tone between the teeth. So when we say, like, think, well, we say, I think so. Yeah, usually sometimes you can hear, I think so, you know, but remember that here we contrast think and sing, you know, like the sing where you wash your hands, but usually you can, when that's the foreign accent, you know. Well, let me tell you that is the specific case when you could aren't. So imagine that you as English teacher, you should be like doctors of phonetics and phonology to diagnose when a student is not articulated the accurate sound of in this case of English. Because of course, imagine that someone says, I think so, you know, so of course you are, well, of course, unless it depends, you know, but of course, some people don't like to be corrected, you know, but of course, our deal is to articulate as you know, as much as we can do it, you know. But of course, you can follow also nowadays. Remember that there are available on the web, for example, dictionaries, you know, where you can also find if you, you know, like doubt the pronunciation of a word, so you can find the pronunciation on the web. So now easily we can like, so remember that also, let me tell you, when you are teaching pronunciation, of course, you need to check, first of all, the pronunciation of the word that you are going to teach, you know. Remember that is kind of difficult sometimes, or it could be, you know, like, well, embarrassing if we are mispronouncing, because nowadays, remember that even some students are good at speaking. So of course we need to like be careful, you know, so that's also the deal of phonetics, that we need to become aware, and of course is through practice and training, you know. Well, let's continue. So places of articulation, we have the alveolar. So remember that the tip of the tongue towards the alveolar ridge here, you know. When we say, notice that they differ on the manner of articulation, but the place is the same, you know, like or z, or z, or l. Okay. Well, you know, here the palatal alveolar. So the front of the tongue towards the area between alveolar ridge and the hard palate. When we say ch, or ja, or sh, z, or so also it is about becoming aware of articulation of these sounds. But notice that also there are some sounds that we don't have in Spanish. For example, the sound z, when we say visual, we don't have it in Spanish, you know. We have it, for example, the sh, but the z, okay. Of course, we have the ja sound, you know. For example, we have the, for example, the chucho, you know. Okay, the palatal, you know, a palatal semi-vowel, the tongue is in the position of a closed front vowel. The soft palate is raised. So we say yeah, 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 yes, you, yet, you know. And the velar, you know, k or g. Notice here we can have the position, you know, k or g or wa. Okay, the glottal, you know, produced by completely or partially constricting the glottis, you know. Okay, so now we are going to watch a video, guys, regarding, for example, we're going to watch a video linguistically describing so then I will like concluding some issues like differences in the case of the phonemic transcription and the case of the, you know, like, for example, the case of, where I will place it and I will explain to you then some differences. You know, we are going to watch this video. This one, you know, this video or this speaker describes the chart of the International Phonetic Alphabet. Here we are going to see an overview, which is very useful, but let me tell you that there is a difference between the allophonic transcription, because here we talk about transcription. When we transcribe with the sound, with the symbols of the sounds, here we can say that there are two differences, you know. The International Phonetic, I think maybe you might have heard about it, but the International Phonetic Alphabet describes the allophones of all the languages, you know, in a chart. Of course, you can, if you want, you can research more on the web, and you can even, if you practice, if you research, so you are going to identify different sounds of all the languages. So let me tell you that also through the fields of linguistics, so even it could be helpful for you to learn other languages, you know. Well, let's start watching it.
By the majority of the languages with a the most suitable backbone of an international phonetic alphabet is the Roman alphabet. It uses most well-known characters and is employed by the majority of the languages with a phonographic writing system. Such an alphabet has been developed by the International Phonetic Association. This unit looks at the general structure of the International Phonetic Alphabet, also discusses the principles of the International Phonetic Association, and will then define transcription systems for present-day English. The International Phonetic Alphabet can be defined or can be subdivided into the following components. We have consonants, a set of consonants, we have a set of vowels, and we have diacritics. Let's look at them in more detail. Now here you see the system of consonants as provided by the International Phonetic Association. They're grouped according to place and manner of articulation and the state of the glottis, that is, whether they are voiced or not. Let's look at an example. Arsha. Now this is a voiceless retroflex fricative, and the symbol is on the chart. In addition to these pulmonic consonants, we also have non-pulmonic consonants and an additional set of symbols, for example, this one, which is a click consonant that is produced with a velaric airstream. The system of vowels provided by the International Phonetic Association is defined by means of a reference system, the so-called cardinal vowel chart. Here you see the primary cardinal vowels, for example, E or O. And if you swap the criterion lip rounding, you get a secondary system. Here you are, where you have and to take two examples. Now these 16 symbols are normally supplemented by central or centralized vowels. For example, the most well-known one is the central vowel schwa. Finally, we have diacritics. Diacritics are additional elements that define phonetic details that can be associated with each particular sound symbol. So for example, we have the diacritic superscript H, which defines a plosive as aspirated. Now with this system, we can define the sound systems of the languages of the world. For example, we could transcribe something like, well, let's identify something. So here is a nonsense word. Well, this is supposed to be that one. And now we know how it is pronounced, namely part eng shoth. Part eng shoth. From this phonetic alphabet, the consonants, the vowels, and the diacritics, each language can now pick the subset of symbols that are required. For example, in present-day English, we have, in RP, we have 44 phonemes, that is 20 vowels and 24 consonants, and many more allophones. But how can we represent this sound system most adequately? Well, the International Phonetic Association provides some guidelines here. The IPA was inaugurated in 1886 under the title of the Phonetic Teachers Association. Among the first members, founding members, were Paul Passy, for example, a French teacher, phonetician, the editor of the first IPA's journal. And the Danish linguist Otto Jespersen was another founding member, was another linguist who was interested, and so was Henry Sweet. So these could be considered the founders of the International Phonetic Association. Among the primary goals of the IPA was the establishment of a phonetic alphabet which should be applicable to all languages. The first version was published in 1888. So this is perhaps a date which we should remember. First publication of an international phonetic alphabet. And together with this publication, a number of rules were set up. For example, the first rule is quite simple. A transcription for a language should use one separate letter for each distinctive sound, so one symbol for one phoneme and not several. And then it should be consistent. Consistency means, well, you should use the same sign, the same symbol for sounds to be found across languages. And then, of course, something we have already defined, you should use as many Roman characters as possible. And finally, diacritics should be avoided wherever possible. So this is then very important. Now, here you see the journal, the International Phonetic, the Handbook of the International Phonetic Association, where the versions of the International Phonetic alphabet are published periodically. Since 1888, the IPA has maintained these principles and has worked constantly to remedy defects, improving upon signs which proved unsatisfactory, and extending the alphabet to provide more symbols for languages which had not received consideration at the outset in the 19th century. Now, what about present-day English? Now, we know present-day English has to pick a subset of the international alphabet for the transcription of its sound system. From the early days, and that was the days when Daniel Jones published his EPD, his English Pronouncing Dictionary, from these early days, 3 variants of transcription systems were developed. Some of them include a larger number of exotic symbols, others are more simple. Let's look at a narrow phonetic transcription first. Narrow phonetic transcriptions, first of all, are represented in these angular brackets, whereas phonemic transcriptions are always presented within slashes. So that's a significant difference. If more symbols and phonemes are used, the transcription is per se not a phonemic one because there is more information, but a phonetic one. Alternatively, you can call it allophonic or narrow. Now, as I said, narrow transcriptions are represented in angular brackets. Let's take the word Paul as an example. Now, in a narrow transcription, we would mark that the plosive is aspirated and that the final alveolar lateral is velarized. So here you have diacritic symbols which are added to the standard set of symbols. Also the colon, which indicates length. In a broad or phonemic transcription, the principle is adhered to one symbol per phoneme. Yet, in order to allow more phonemes to be specified, such transcription systems use a number of additional symbols. This is a helpful method for the description of more specific values of particular phonemes. For example, in Paul, we need a special symbol for the O. We cannot use the normal O. But you see now we're transcribing in terms of phonemes and dispense with diacritic symbols. The most economical transcription systems are the so-called simplified phonemic transcriptions. If possible, they confine themselves to the set of symbols available on typewriters or computer keyboards, thus aiming at a high degree of intelligibility for the foreign learner. Simplified phonemic transcriptions go back to Henry Sweet's broad rhomic system, which we discussed in another clip, and to Daniel Jones' attempts to simplify his own EPD system. So one possibility of converting Paul into a simplified phonemic transcription version could be this one here. Sometimes, however, such systems can be misleading. In the Atlas of North American English system, the word, or this, stands for my and not for may. Now, what sort of systems do we use in present-day English today? Today, we have two most popular transcription systems. On the one hand, we have a transcription system for received pronunciation, the standard phonological dialect of British, or more precisely English, which has been published in the LPD, Longman's Pronouncing Dictionary. And the person responsible for this transcription system is the English phonologist and phonetician John Wells. In North America, a different transcription system is used in North American English, the Atlas of North American English system, published in Bill Labov's monumental work about the phonological dialects of North America, is some sort of standard. This system goes back not only to Labov himself, but to American structuralists such as Leonard Bloomfield, Bloch, Traeger, and Smith, and some others.
Hey guys, well, just concluding on this, from watching this video, I guess that you have identified the differences if you ever heard about the International Phonetic Alphabet. For example, remember that it is easily to understand the phonemic transcription is the one that most of the dictionaries use the transcription, which is easy to follow. While in the case of the English phonetic alphabet, or the International Phonetic Alphabet, describe the allophones. For example, if we go back to just to conclude, or just concluding on these features, we go back to the chart, to explain a little bit more about these differences, like we have already checked. But let me tell you, go back to the chart so you to explain the features. But even, for example, in the case of the word that we already checked, but this is the phonemic transcription. Notice that the symbols are easy to understand. While in the case of for example, let me tell you about dictionaries, guys. For example, the case of the Cambridge dictionary, so it uses the American and British accent. So you can see here the two differences. You can contrast words from British, the articulation of British or in American English. For example, the Macmillan, so it shows you the British accent. But in the case of the Webster, so it shows you the American accent, but it shows you the allophonic transcription, which is a little more advanced, So here there are some differences in this case, to identify. And the case of the transcription. So when we transcribe words, for example, let me tell you that notice that you could identify, and most of the dictionaries you could identify the symbols, while in the case of the allophones is similar to this one. This is an allophonic transcription, because here we are transcribing the allophone of the intervocalic position of these two sounds, the t or the d in intervocalic position. So in this case, we are focusing on the allophone. That's why it is placed in square brackets, you know. But for example, if we go back, we check, for example, on the case of some words that are, let me show you here, for example, that's the point that I want to show you. Here, for example, you know, notice that we transcribe the sounds, you know, the each phoneme in slashes. So that is also a big difference that I guess that, well, I think that you have understood the difference between the International Phonetic Alphabet and the phonemic transcription. Of course, they are going to differ some symbols, but in the end, so you can easily understand this chart. Just to concluding, you know, here, for example, we walk to this chart. So here, you know, it is, let me tell you that also you can find phonemic transcription charts on the web. And even there are some apps where you can also practice, you know, the sounds of English. And also notice that there are, as I told you, so, well, this is some suggestions if you want to become more aware about these features, but also on the web, you could identify some dictionaries. As I told you, for example, the Macmillan, if you are interested to articulate some British, you know, sounds. So the Macmillan on the web is a good way to understand some features of the British accent. I mean, into words, because of course, remember that a language is composed also by the stress and intonation and rhythm. That would be another conference, you know, because of the time. But I told you, you know, I have, well, I can suggest you to, if you are interested in the field, and I think that, of course, is part of our deal, you know, to, you know, become aware of these features. Remember that we should be like doctors to diagnose and identify when our students are mispronouncing some words. You know, of course, we have nowadays the technology to check out the pronunciation of some words, you know. Well, you know, like giving some examples, you know, because in English, so that is part of the rhythm also of the English, you know, through when there is a context. But remember that, for example, in this case of this sound, for example, remember that this sound in isolation, when we articulate a word in isolation, when we say you, so that is without friction, you know. But of course, when we say why don't you, so so we come an assimilation. Also, we have, remember that also these features like assimilation, we have it also in case of our Spanish. For example, we say yellow in Spanish, but when we say el hielo, so it is assimilated. So also we need to check other features of the pronunciation of a language, like, for example, the rhythm, the stress, the intonation. You know, all of these features can help us to, well, describe, you know. So in the case of, you know, like teaching English through phonetics, through phonology, through linguistics, so is to become more accurate, you know. And also nowadays we have available different resources, you know. We have apps, so we have videos, you know. So it depends on how we can direct our focus of attention in the case of teaching English. So remember that in the case of teaching English, is not only about teaching like speaking, you know, grammar, you know, like the way most of the time we teach, you know, like sentences, you know. Of course, it depends on our training. So that's why well, thank you for, you know, attending these conferences, because of course, I know that you are totally committed to improve your way of teaching as well as your way of speaking the language, and in this case, English. Well, guys, I think that we, well, just, you know, to suggest other features, like, for example, remember that nowadays, as I told you, so there are different. Even you can, guys, you can, there are also videos on the web, and, you know, for example, on YouTube, regarding the different accents, you know. Let me tell you that, for example, we can have also fake accents, you know. Imagine that also it is a capacity to fake accents, you know. For example, in the case of the FBI, so they have specialists in linguistics, you know, where they can identify even through the speech of a person, you know, from where they are coming from, or from where they are, you know. So it is also a specialty, you know, in the case of languages, also to identify. So my advice is that you should be more aware and pay more attention how people speak, you know, a language. So that is called speech. So yes, to conclude on these features, so we have like language and speech, you know, also the you know, the French linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. So he was the one who set up the distinction between the language and speech, you know. Also remember that this study of linguistics became more productive in the 18th century, when there were studies also for the tribal languages, you know, because remember that along, you know, since the Greek ones or the Romans, so there was about, like, for example, the description of Latin, you know, the structure of Latin. So because it was the international language, but nowadays, remember that English still is the international language. Well, guys, thank you for all. That's all for today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Master Jorge Lopez, for the valuable information provided to all of the participants through the conference. We really appreciate the time that you had with us. I am going to read some questions that the audience sent through the YouTube chat. The first one is from Erika Solares. She asked, how can we make the phonetic class more attractive for our students nowadays that we are facing virtual classes?
Well, as I told you, so even, for example, remember that there are some specific websites where you can check even for children, you know, even you can start, like, for example, even the alphabet. So when we teach the alphabet, when we say, for example, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. So there are good videos, you know, on YouTube. But of course, it depends on our training and for looking for specific activities, you know. But well, guys, yeah, remember that even, you know, teaching a language is like teaching a language to children. So even it doesn't matter if they are adults, but of course it depends, because, you know, sometimes adults don't like to you know, do games, you know. It depends on the approach. But nowadays, you know, there are a lot of resources. The idea is that we need to know that there is a linguistic approach to teach pronunciation. And as I told you, there are several resources, apps, you know, there are phonemic charts, games, you know, on the web, where you can, like, practice the pronunciation of your kids, you know, of your students.
Thank you so much. The other question, and is about something that you said. In which grade do you consider we as teachers, we have to start teaching phonology?
Well, let me tell you that we shouldn't teach phonology as I did. We need to know phonology because we are teachers, English teachers. But of course, when we teach the pronunciation, of course, we don't say, well, listen to me, you know, this is, for example, a bilabial, you know, a voicing sound. So you practice the sound and the way, so you articulate the sound. So phonology is for you as English teachers. But of course, when you practice pronunciation with your students, so you can do several things, you know, even show, it is about awareness, guys, because you can, as I told you, sometimes when we don't have blue eyes or blonde hair, so our students don't believe that that sound is pronounced like this way. You know, like, for example, we say like visual. Well, you know, but in this case, you could do drills, you know, you say, listen to me, you know, like, okay, now say it, you know, and you could do funny things as well. As I told you, so there are the several resources, but of course, it depends on our knowing of these features, as well as planning, you know, researching.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, if you can provide us an app or maybe a web page in which we can improve our pronunciation by using phonology?
Okay, well, let me find out one. But, you know, well, I used to have one in my cell phone, but it takes a little space, you know. But you can press, you know, on the web, phonemic charts. For example, English American phonemic charts. And of course, they are going to appear several. Even on your cell phone, you can find, there are, you know, on the apps, you can find apps for the, you know, for the English sounds. So it's easily, you know, on the cell phone, you can look for apps, you know, but of course it takes some space in your cell phones. But also on the web, you could also identify some phonemic charts. You know, the idea is to know the terms, you know, phonemic charts. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for solving all of our doubts. We really appreciate your time, as I was telling you. Thank you so much for the time that you provided us. So this is the end of the conference. The TTS program sponsored by United States Embassy, AGERE, and with the support Sección de Idiomas and Facultad de Humanidades has developed 3 manuals with material that you might find interesting and useful. We are sharing the Drive folder link from where you may download the manuals at this moment. Please don't forget to fill in the attendance form. Remember, it will only be available for 15 minutes after the conference ends. Also remember that diplomas will be available on June 12, 2021. Thank you so much for your participation in this conference. We invite you to follow our transmission on these 3 days of TTS 2021. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for attending the conference.